True Crime Brewery contains disturbing content related to real-life crimes. Medical information is opinion based on facts of a crime and should not be interpreted as medical advice or treatment. Listener discretion is advised.
Welcome to True Crime Brewery. I'm Jill.
And I'm Dick.
And this is our 600th episode.
Ooh.
Yeah, believe it?
Pop the cork.
Yeah. So I don't really have a special episode related to that, but I just thought it was worth mentioning that that's a lot of episodes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It doesn't seem like it's that many.
No. And that doesn't include bonus ones we did early on. So lots of episodes. And I just want to thank everyone who's hung in there and listened with us. It's been really great.
Certainly has.
Yeah. So let's keep it going, I guess, right?
We got some left in us.
I think so. So when Monica Dunn, a beautiful mother of 3, was shot to death in her home, her husband was with her. But he would claim that she had done it to herself. Likely story, right?
Yeah, we've heard this before.
We have, but this might be a little different. The couple had become estranged after months of infidelity and some really vicious arguments. So Monica's police officer husband, Paul Dunn, was the logical suspect in her death. But Paul maintained that he was innocent, even though no one believed him. He was ostracized by his fellow law enforcement officers and his friends, despised by Monica's family, and he even lost custody of his children. Join us at the quiet end for Presumed Guilty, the mysterious death of Monica Dunn. So Monica and Paul lived a life that was very passionate, but there was also a lot of volatility. After Monica's sudden and violent death, shocking secrets about her life and her relationships revealed a marriage that was doomed from the start. So, would a murder trial provide closure to Monica's family, or would the reason for her death remain forever unknown? That's what we're going to talk about today.
Okay, and we've got a nice New Mexico beer today. This is from a newish brewery called Flock of Moons that's rapidly becoming one of my favorite breweries. What we're drinking today is Lunar Winter. It's a Saison with 7% alcohol by volume. Beer's a clear gold color, large white head, a little bit of lace, wonderful aroma, lemon, spice, and we got a nice taste. Lemon rind, it's tart, a little bit of ginger, crisp and clean mouthfeel. It's one of the best beers I've ever had.
Well, that's saying something, because how many beers have you rated?
3,400, somewhere around there.
Wow, okay. So if this is becoming your favorite, that means something.
It's an incredible beer.
Yeah.
And it's not one of the styles of beer that I like usually that much. This hits it.
All right. Sounds great. So it is interesting that our 600th episode is a case in New Mexico.
That wasn't on purpose, was it?
No, it wasn't. It just kind of happened. Because this case was actually recommended to us by Justin not that long ago. And I just read about it and became really interested in mostly the forensics of proving how this happened, by looking at the trajectory and wounds and things like that. So
yeah.
It's a good thing to talk through, I think, as far as true crime goes.
It's an interesting case.
Yeah, absolutely. So Monica and Paul Dunn lived in the small town of Farmington, New Mexico, and it's near the very north of the state at a region known as the Four Corners. And that's where you could stand in 4 states at once: New Mexico, Utah, Colorado, and Arizona. So Paul was born in Albuquerque in 1958, and in his early years, his family actually lived in Santa Fe. He had a younger brother named Mark and an older sister named Robin. And when he was 13, they all moved to a small farm in Nambi, New Mexico. So Paul would describe his childhood as happy and normal. He played basketball and he learned to ride horses. He enjoyed taking care of the animals on his family's farm. When Paul was 16, he met some New Mexico State police officers, and that would really just kind of change his whole outlook on life, or at least it would have him decide what he wanted to do with his life as an adult. So these state police officers stopped by a gas station where Paul was working, and one of the officers invited Paul to do a ride-along, which he did do. He actually ended up doing that several times. This experience would lead him to a career in law enforcement, and after he graduated from high school, Paul did take law enforcement classes at New Mexico State University in Las Cruces for a year. So in 1977, he was hired by Santa Fe to work as a corrections officer at the jail there. And he was working there when he met and married his first wife, Juliet Martinez. In 1979, he became a Santa Fe police officer. So Paul and Juliet had a daughter who they named April, and she was born in 1981. And they moved to Farmington, New Mexico in 1982, and that's because Paul was offered a job at their police department, and there he could have better wages and more opportunities for advancement. So in those years, Paul was very focused on being the best cop he could be. He was very particular about how he looked, wearing a pressed uniform, shined boots, and a neat crew cut. He did have some friends, but many of his coworkers saw him as being arrogant. He was just a bit too much for some of them. And some of them may have been jealous of this young officer who was good-looking and muscular and did attract the attention of women. But he also may have been a little standoffish. He could come across as cocky, and he spent hours on his looks and his physique, running and lifting weights at the gym. One officer's wife, though, would call Paul an asshole. He had a hatred for anyone who broke the law, and he was known to get into fights with suspects, so that's not great. But always committed to his job, he did take courses in firearms training. He worked both patrol and traffic, and then he did work to become an accident reconstruction expert. So he was a hard worker.
Yeah, but so far you're painting a picture of the type of police officer that kind of takes the law into his own hands.
Well, I don't know if I'd go that far. But yeah, I see what you're saying. He was a bit much.
Yeah.
Yeah. But, it's kind of like a cliche. The cop who's all jacked up and,
on steroids, all that stuff.
All that stuff, yeah.
So when Paul met Monica, she was working as a clerk at the courthouse. She was a gorgeous woman who put a real effort into looking her best. She had gotten pregnant at age 15 and married the baby's father, Patrick Cortez. He was her high school sweetheart. The couple divorced in the 1980s. And then later on, he got killed by a drunk driver a few years later while riding his motorcycle. So even though they were divorced and had been divorced for some time, Monica would never fully get over Patrick's sudden death.
No, so Monica was very close to her family, though. She visited her parents every day and kept in frequent contact with her siblings. At the courthouse, she was very friendly, and she'd bring in candy to share with anyone who came by her desk. Some of her coworkers thought she was aloof, but her looks could also be intimidating because she seemed like she was always just really dolled up. Monica met Paul when he came to the courthouse to get a citation book because Paul wrote a lot of tickets. He liked to write tickets. He liked to pull people over. So he needed a new citation book that day. He was out of tickets. When he noticed the side door of the municipal clerk's office was open, he peeked in and he saw Monica sitting at her desk and she was crying. So Paul asked her if there was anything he could do. Now, I don't know if he would have said that if it was like a 60-year-old woman. I don't know if her looks had something to do with this because it does seem like he was attracted to her. Many men were.
Yeah, that's a good question.
Yeah. But Monica told Paul that her cousin was in serious condition after being in a car accident. And it was difficult to understand what she was saying because she really was sobbing. But he stayed with her for several minutes and tried to comfort her. So that was their first really getting to know each other, although they had seen each other, inside the courthouse here and there. But Paul did generally work nights, so he'd rarely seen Monica enough to talk to her. But now he did notice that she had these big brown eyes, flawless skin, and thick dark curls. But Paul was still married at this time, although there were problems in his marriage. Still, he and Juliet were supposed to be working on things, and it's hard to say how committed he was to this because he would end up, of course, with Monica. But at the time, he would say that he wasn't interested in Monica, really. He was trying to work on his marriage. But the very same afternoon that he spoke with Monica, Paul did ask a fellow cop about the beautiful woman working in the municipal courthouse. He told Paul Monica's name, but warned him that she was dating their sergeant at the time. Now, of course, Monica was aware of the attention that men would pay to her. She didn't try to hide her body, but she dressed professionally. She didn't, dress like a sex worker or anything. And despite not having a lot of money, she was wearing some very fashionable outfits, and she would rarely repeat the same outfit twice. So wherever she went, Monica liked to be the best-dressed woman there. And even at home, she dressed very nicely. She really wasn't into cooking or keeping the house up, but she worked hard at her job, and she did take good care of her daughter.
So when Monica was 22 and Paul was 25, Monica broke off the relationship with the sergeant, and she turned her attention to Paul and started flirting with him. Paul couldn't believe that such a beautiful woman would be interested in him. Paul had never cheated on his wife before, but he started seeing Monica romantically. Their flirting at work progressed until it was obvious to the other employees what was going on. And the first evening they went out together, they had sex in his car.
Yeah, and soon when Paul wasn't working, he was just with Monica all the time. Monica helped him with his divorce in 1984, and he thought she was just the perfect woman. But then he did notice one thing that did bother him, but apparently not enough to end the relationship with her. Monica was jealous of Paul's daughter, April, who lived with her mother. Now, the child was only 4 years old when they got together, but Monica seemed to resent her and really didn't like having her around at all, so that should have been a real red flag.
You bet.
Yeah. Later on, when April was older, she would say that Monica had been verbally abusive to her behind her father's back, so really no love lost between those two.
No, there wasn't. And Paul really didn't understand how Monica could be so jealous of a child. He thought it was just a passing phase. So he put that out of his mind, and he and Monica planned for their wedding and life together. They were so absorbed with each other and with their relationship that other people were just off in the background somewhere. So Paul became a little isolated from his friends, but he only wanted to be with Monica. This isolation, cutting yourself off from friends, is an early sign of an unhealthy relationship.
It is, and I think we've heard of it more often with men who are controlling their wives or girlfriends, who kind of want to keep them separated from their friends and family. And I've also heard of men who are jealous when their wife has a baby, of the attention the baby gets from them.
Oh, sure.
So it's really something that Monica seemed to have. It must be an insecurity. I mean, where do you think that stems from?
Well, Monica has a child from her previous marriage, right?
Yeah.
She related okay with that kid?
Yeah, she was a good mom, everybody said. Yeah, it was just having another woman's child at her house that seemed to bother her.
That and the fact that if she's living in the house, she has attention paid to her.
Yeah, but she wasn't living with them full time. April lived with her mother full time.
Yeah.
But I just wonder if having April around was maybe a reminder that there was another woman in Paul's life before. And it kind of kept that connection between the two.
I was just also thinking that she was a little off with April because she's the other woman's child. And
yeah,
if Paul's spending time with the child, he's not paying attention to Monica.
Yeah, and I think Monica really kind of needed most of the attention centered on her. She was used to that. She was always just kind of striking and got a lot of attention. So I think anything that would take the attention off of her was probably difficult for her.
Right. There you are.
So I think there are those several things we talked about that probably played into this, but definitely a sign of things not being very healthy in the relationship.
Yeah, and they're not even married yet.
Yes. So Monica and Paul were married on Valentine's Day, 1986. Many of Monica's family members didn't approve of Paul, though. They would call him a gringo because Monica was Latina and he was not. Every Sunday they visited Monica's parents like she always had, but her sisters and her brother would give Paul unpleasant looks or just completely ignore him, kind of just didn't want him around, it seemed like. And then they would all speak Spanish to each other, which Paul didn't know, and this made him feel like even more of an outsider. So even though Monica's siblings didn't really give Paul a chance at all, her parents and her uncle did like Paul and treated him quite well. So it was just the siblings, really. So at least the parents were accepting of him. They liked the fact that he was a police officer and upstanding citizen, all that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, of course, they could tell that he just adored Monica. I mean, that was obvious. So Monica did keep her job at the municipal court, and Paul continued to work as a police officer. He soon did take on a second job as a security officer for the former governor to help make ends meet. Monica did like to spend quite a bit of money on clothing, and Paul really didn't mind, at least early on. He just wanted her to be happy, and he was willing to do whatever it took. She was very sweet and loving with him, so he thought, she's doing all this for me as far as being here for me and loving me. I don't mind working more to please her because I love her. So it seemed to be okay, at least early on. Now, 2 years into the marriage, Monica and Paul planned to buy a home and have a child together. And after Monica got pregnant, Paul just couldn't believe it. He thought she looked even more beautiful. But Monica did not like how pregnancy changed her appearance. Still, they were both thrilled when she gave birth to their daughter Diane on September 3rd, 1988. But it was Paul who would get up in the night with the new baby. Monica didn't want to breastfeed, to ruin her breasts. And she didn't want to be up in the night losing sleep. So Paul was in charge of all that, and it was an agreement that they had, so he really wasn't resenting it, at least at first, because he also did most of the house cleaning, the laundry, and the cooking, even though he's working 2 jobs. But he's, young, he's in love, he just seemed to take it all in stride, happy to put in the effort to keep his wife and his baby daughter well cared for. So seemed okay so far.
So far, so good.
Yep.
He's taken on a lot of extra things.
He is, but Monica is still working. So it's not like she's doing nothing.
Yeah. Now, later in 1988, after Diana was born, Paul joined the school program Adopt a Cop. Paul worked with kindergartners, 1st grade, 3rd grade, and 5th graders. When the police department issued trading cards with police officers' pictures, Paul's card was very popular. And he was a guest speaker at the driving school also.
Yeah, he was really good at that because he was an accident reconstruction expert. And one of the things they do in driving school, at least they used to do, is they would show you videos of accidents and the horrible things that could happen when you drive.
Don't drink and drive, right?
Right. Don't drink and drive, don't speed, all that stuff. So he was really good at kind of scaring them straight, if you will, kind of keeping that fear of the dangers of driving and instilling in them the idea that it's important to drive safely, that's the priority. Driving a car is a big responsibility. You need to be safe and all that.
That's right.
Mm-hmm. But then Monica got upset because she learned she was pregnant again just about 1 year after they had her daughter. So she wanted an abortion, actually. She just didn't want her body to go through that. She really didn't think they needed another child, but Paul was very determined that they would go through with this pregnancy, that she would have this child. So to get her to follow through with having the child, Paul agreed to have a vasectomy so it wouldn't happen again. So she agreed, but she really just didn't enjoy being pregnant. It's not fun for a lot of people. She suffered from morning sickness well past the first trimester. And of course, she complained about the weight gain. She was very vain. And that was just important to her. It was part of her identity to be beautiful. In her 7th month, Monica got appendicitis. So she had to have her appendix removed. So they went to the OR for an emergency appendectomy, and she had to have a C-section. So they decided they needed to take the baby. They did the C-section first, and then they did the appendectomy. So their next daughter, Raquel, was born. She was born healthy on August 3rd, 1989.
So this baby was born about 8 weeks early. Had a fairly uncomplicated newborn course.
Yeah, did fine.
They figured as long as they're doing the appendectomy, we'll do a C-section. I mean, how do they arrive at a decision to do both?
Well, I really don't know. I think they just decided that it'd be better if she wasn't pregnant when she went through the appendectomy. And I don't know if perhaps it had burst. I don't know.
I guess that could be.
Yeah.
It just didn't quite follow for me that you had to have both together.
Well, I mean, this was the late 80s, too. This was a while ago.
Yeah.
So I think that there were more open appendectomies back then. So for whatever reasons at the time, they decided it was safer to do the C-section before doing the appendectomy. But then after that, Paul and Monica really loved their daughters, and Paul was a caring father, and it seemed like everything would be okay. But one thing was that Paul would not show his affection publicly, which did seem to kind of start to bother Monica. And it would actually work against him as well when it comes to his being seen as a loving husband or as someone who would hurt his wife later on down the road. But Paul began to feel like he couldn't satisfy Monica no matter what he did after that. She had trouble accepting the changes to her body after the C-section, especially the scars from the C-section and the appendectomy. She believed she was only attractive if she was made up and nicely dressed, so she wouldn't believe Paul when he told her that she was beautiful. So her sagging breasts were a daily complaint of hers, and she really wanted to get surgery and implants. So they began to argue a lot about that and just a lot of things. They just had different ways of looking at things. But eventually Monica did get breast surgery, and this gave her self-esteem a boost. But Paul was upset because her boss had paid for the surgery. So, what do you think of that? That's a little red flaggish.
Just a bit. I know she said that $3,000 was a bonus, but give me a break.
Well, what do you mean? Expand.
Well,
what are you implying here?
I'm implying that there's something going on with Monica and her boss. Because I don't believe that he just gave $3,000 to her and said, have your breasts done.
No, probably not. She could have asked him for the money.
Yeah. To me, it just seems that there's more going on than a simple financial transaction.
Yeah, and that's pretty much what Paul felt as well. It just didn't seem to make sense to him that her boss would want to pay for her to have surgery to enhance her breasts. It has nothing to do with her job. I've heard of things like that when women are exotic dancers or if they're acting and something like that, where the breasts are actually kind of part of the job, right? Although it still doesn't seem necessary. But this, she's working at a desk, and there were just some thoughts going on around them that something was going on anyway. So I guess you're right to think that that was suspicious.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's obvious.
Yeah, there were rumors about Monica and her boss, and some of her coworkers had seen him giving Monica back rubs at her desk, so very inappropriate for her doing that as well. So, as Paul and Monica's daughters became toddlers and then preschoolers, Monica and Paul's relationship continued to deteriorate. Even though it seemed like Monica was being unfaithful or at least flirting with other men, she was very jealous of any interactions Paul had with other women. And then Paul felt like Monica was trying to separate him from his family and friends because she just always wanted him to herself. They only spent time with her family, and Paul began to feel isolated and kind of just not fitting in. He had let it happen, but he just felt it was easier to go along with what Monica wanted, which was fine until he started resenting that. At first Paul's ego was boosted by Monica's jealousy, but he began to feel suffocated by it over time. He was a bodybuilder, so plenty of women would look at him or admire his looks. But if you look back at them when Monica was around, she would become very upset. She would ask him if he was sleeping with the woman or if he wanted that woman instead of her, and it just became problematic.
Monica had been molested as a child by a relative, and she had been convinced by her abuser that she was irresistible to men, and she had to submit to their wants.
Ugh, that's awful.
Well, yeah, it would cause problems for her, right?
Yeah.
Made her feel like her only value was in her appearance and sexuality.
Sure, yes.
So even if Paul showed her his love by being an attentive husband and father, Monica would always question her attractiveness and compare herself to other women.
Which is hard. As you're getting older and you have children, it's hard to keep up that.
You bet.
Yeah. But as their arguing got worse, things began to get even physical sometimes. Monica once threw a drinking glass at Paul, and another time he lifted her off the ground and she was kicking and screaming at him. And when he let go of her and dropped her that time, she sprained her ankle. And this was his explanation of the event. So after that, Paul said he tried to be more passive, and Monica would use the silent treatment against him. But then Paul met Anita Harris. So Anita was riding horses with a friend on the former Governor Tom Bollock's land when she saw Paul outside chainsawing some wood near his truck. So she said hello and told her friend that she thought he was cute. Then she went ahead on her horse ride without giving it too much thought afterwards. But then Anita saw Paul again at a Christmas party. So he was with Monica at the party, and Anita noticed that she was very possessive, holding on to his arm and keeping an eye on the other women who were there. Still, Paul did manage to speak with Anita at that party, and something just kind of happened. There was an attraction. They got along.
A moment.
Yeah, definitely.
And soon after that party, Anita and Paul met up back on the former governor's property and shared stories from their lives. For Paul, Anita was someone who he could tell about the feelings he'd been holding in for such a long time. He'd never had a real friendship with a woman before. His experiences with women had all started with a physical attraction. But with Anita, it seemed like a deeper connection. She was certainly different from Monica.
Very different. Almost the opposite.
Almost.
Yeah.
She wore very little makeup, dressed very casually, with her strawberry blonde hair in a ponytail and freckles on her skin.
Yeah, so very different from Monica, and not just in looks, but in the way she thought about life, the way she behaved.
The whole thing.
The whole thing. And Paul was attracted to that. At the same time, money was a big part of the problems between Monica and Paul. They had separate bank accounts, and Paul was the one who was responsible for all of the household bills. Thing is, he didn't know where Monica's money went. He did know that she spent a lot of it on clothing and makeup and things like that, so he knew she spent most of it on herself. And over time, he did begin to resent this a little bit because he didn't make a lot of money anyway. He was a policeman and a security guard, so he wasn't rolling in money.
Oh.
And he had the older daughter from his first marriage, and now they have 2 children, so there were a lot of expenses. So the resentment's building up over all these things. So after several weeks of talking and getting closer to each other, Anita and Paul discussed the possibility of having a relationship, like a romantic relationship. But Paul said if he got a divorce, he would lose custody of his daughters, and he wasn't willing to do that. Anita said she understood, but Paul was falling in love with her. He would say it wasn't the same passionate love that he'd had with Monica, but he knew that that kind of love really wasn't long-lasting. Anita actually saw a soft, caring side of Paul that most people would never see. When Paul told her about his home life, Anita was really upset with how Monica treated him. So, I don't know, when there's a married guy telling you about the problems that his wife has, you kind of have to take that with a grain of salt.
Yeah, and unless you get both sides of the story.
Right.
So I don't think she's going to look up Monica to get her side of it.
No, but Paul was telling her, and she started seeing Monica as self-centered and thought that Monica really treated Paul more like a servant than a husband. And that may have been somewhat true, but actually, Paul had set it up that way. He'd had no problem doing the cleaning and taking care of the babies and all that, so you really can't blame Monica when that's how they started out. That was how the relationship worked.
There might have been different expectations about that.
I'm sure, yes. So, even though Anita couldn't understand why Paul would love someone like Monica, most of the people in Paul's life couldn't imagine him with a woman like Anita. She lived in jeans and dirty boots and really seemed to prefer animals to humans. She was a real free spirit, and she had a natural look, rarely wearing any makeup, and she could be kind of outspoken. So Paul's friends and family just really wouldn't see him with someone like Anita. That hadn't been his type in the past anyway. But he felt like he was kind of growing and having a more mature relationship at this point in his life.
Yeah.
Which, they wouldn't understand because he really kept most of that inside, and the only person he really shared that with at this point was Anita. So Anita's differences from his wife were much of the attraction that he had to her. She had this easy self-confidence, which was the opposite from Monica's neediness and jealousy. And it took Monica at least 2 hours to get ready to leave the house, even just to run to the store. But Anita would get up in the morning and just throw on a t-shirt and jeans, and she was ready to go. Anita and Paul did start having an affair. You knew that was going to happen, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we saw that coming. And they started sleeping together that March. And the first time that they had sex was in a car, parked under some cottonwood trees by a river. And Anita would describe this as very romantic. So Anita had learned a lot about relationships. She'd been in an abusive relationship prior to meeting Paul, and she'd been through therapy and read books, and she gave Paul a book that she'd read about codependency. So after Paul read that book, he said that he realized how unhappy he really was with Monica. And he kind of shocked Anita because he started talking about leaving Monica and getting his own apartment. And this just seemed kind of out of the blue and too fast to Anita. So she kind of backed up and broke things off with Paul. After her bad marriage, she didn't want to get involved with someone. After her bad marriage, she really didn't want to get involved with someone who was in a not great relationship himself. She wanted to be healthy. So she knew if Paul divorced Monica, that would really change things. So she needed to figure out what she really wanted in life before plunging into a serious relationship with Paul. And this was hard for Paul because he was totally in on Anita at that point.
So Paul wrote a letter to Anita expressing his love for her. He told her they would be great together, but he knew he had to let her go. He had written the letter mainly to get his feelings out and didn't know if he would ever send it. So he put it in the glove compartment of his truck thinking he would be safe there. Meanwhile, he began to speak up to Monica and point out that he was the one making the sacrifices and doing all the giving in their relationship. But this made Monica wonder why he was having such a drastic change of attitude. So she starts keeping a closer eye on him, searching his things. Now,
this is trouble, as you can
Trouble's
imagine.
coming.
Yeah.
After she didn't find anything in the house, she moved on to searching his truck.
Uh-oh.
Now, I think he should have done a better job of hiding that letter.
Absolutely,
Right.
Especially knowing what a jealous woman she was. It's really kind of dumb that he did that.
She had eventually popped open the glove compartment.
Of course.
And found the letter that Paul had written to Anita. And even though the body of the letter was that Paul was ending the affair, Monica focused on the words of love he had written to the other woman. Paul loved Anita, though that meant he didn't love her. She felt betrayed and alone.
Yeah, I think it was very upsetting for her. I think even though Monica probably was having affairs, or at least an affair, we'd find out later that she did have an abortion, and of course Paul had had a vasectomy, so pretty sure that Monica did have an affair. But I think that was just to try and
Probably had sex with someone that wasn't her husband.
Yes, right? Maybe the boss who bought the breast implants. That's a possibility. But I think that even though she did that, she felt very betrayed by Paul, because I think Monica was just someone who needed that kind of constant reassurance from men about her attractiveness.
Oh, I think so.
So even though she did that, I don't know if she really was thinking about leaving Paul at all. And of course, to her, with her ego, he leaving her would be much worse than she leaving him.
You bet.
Be a lot for her to handle. So after reading the letter, Monica decided to go to the bank where Anita worked as a loan officer. She brought some friends along with her too. And when she walked into the bank, looking beautiful, of course, in a tight-fitting suit with flawless makeup, Anita recognized her as Paul's wife. So when Monica saw Anita's nameplate, she walked right over to her desk. And loud enough for everyone in the lobby to hear, she said, "I'm Paul Dunn's wife. I just wanted to meet the woman who is breaking up my marriage." So Anita was just kind of horrified. She quietly tried to explain that she wasn't seeing Paul anymore, which I think was true at that moment, but Monica raised her voice even more and said, "How can you live with yourself being with another woman's husband?" So Anita was just kind of mortified. Then after Monica and her friends left the bank, Anita called Monica at the municipal court. And she told Monica that she did not have designs on her husband and that she was not the reason that Paul was leaving her. And we don't even know that Paul was going to leave her at that point. But when Monica got home that evening, she told Paul to leave. That was it. She wasn't even going to discuss it. And he did as she said. So he took most of his things, but it is important to mention that she asked him to leave a shotgun behind. She said she wanted to keep it for security reasons. Although I think we know that you're more likely to have you or someone in your family hurt than to save yourself with a loaded gun in the house.
Yes.
But she said she wanted it for home defense, and Paul said he understood. Then the next day, Monica went to see an attorney, Victor Titus, who was a friend of hers and Paul's. She told Titus that she was seeking a divorce and would need an attorney who was not so close to them as he was. But she didn't mention anything about any spousal abuse or about Paul having an affair.
Then a few days later, Monica went to see Farmington police officer Lawrence Dusty Downs. When he saw a bruise on her face, she explained it was from Paul. Now, it was common knowledge among the police that Paul and Monica were having marriage issues, so he wasn't entirely surprised. Monica's sister's boyfriend had come to the police station with her, and Monica spoke for the first time about being abused by Paul and confided that she believed he was taking steroids. Downs took photos of her bruises in a room with the blinds drawn, but he did not have a female officer in the room with them when he took them, which is the normal procedure. So Monica had a bruise on her face, her thigh, and her side. Downs also interviewed Monica and gave her a pamphlet on domestic violence.
So it's hard for me to understand why he would go against protocol. And of course, many people would say, well, there was something going on between those two.
Well, sure.
Yeah, you just immediately would think that?
Well, if you take the whole thing in totality, doing the pictures like that could be a sign that they were having a little get-together.
Yeah, I mean, it's really strange. Why would you want to do that without a female officer if everything was on the up and up? Because you're
asking for
causing
trouble.
Problems. Yeah, exactly. So it was curious. There would be people that would question why that happened, and we don't really know. Now, some people believe that Paul was still seeing Anita romantically, and many people thought Monica and Dusty Downs were having an affair, especially after that incident. Monica's best friend, Vicky Maestas, said that Monica often came to work with tears in her eyes, or she had red eyes from crying. Monica told her that after Paul moved out, he had been harassing her at home and following her to find out where she was and who she was with all the time. Monica told Vicky that she had looked in Paul's truck and found a letter he had written to Anita. So it was obvious that Paul and Anita had had an affair, if they weren't currently, and Monica made copies of the letter, keeping one for herself and giving one to her father. So she'd involved her family in this, and her parents are turning against Paul at this point as well because he's hurt their daughter.
Yeah.
Yeah. So one day at work when Monica seemed especially sad, two of her coworkers decided to go and see her after work. While they were visiting with her, Paul showed up at the front door. Paul and Monica spoke at the front door and the coworkers heard them arguing. Paul told Monica that he loved her, but he didn't think he was in love with her anymore. Oh, those are the words of death. Now, it's just like it's not me, it's you. So Monica was just angry and upset and told him to leave. So he left.
Now, he did come to the house every Monday and Tuesday to see his daughters. He brought groceries, he cooked, he did the laundry. Monica and Paul went to a movie together once, met at a neighborhood pub a couple times.
Yeah, so it seemed like maybe they were going to try and work things out.
But when Monica went to Las Vegas for a weekend, she wouldn't tell Paul who she went with. There were rumors that she had gone on the trip with Dusty Downs.
Well, if you won't say who you went with, right there, that's a bad sign.
Well, it makes it seem less innocent, doesn't it?
Well, yeah. I mean, even if she did go with a male, it would be better to say than to say, I'm not going to tell you, because then you for sure think she's having an affair.
Right.
Right. So Monica filed divorce papers on April 1st, and then she had lunch with Dusty Downs, so I think there was something there about the rumor.
I think it's more than just rumor.
I think so, too. That Friday, Paul stopped by Monica's office and told her he would be picking up the girls on Monday morning. He said he also planned to mow the lawn, clean out the hot tub, and do the grocery shopping. But when Monica followed Paul, she saw that he went to Anita's house, so she was very upset. It seemed like maybe he was hoping to come back home to her and her daughters, but now he's going to Anita's, so she's like, what the fuck is going on? And that same weekend, Monica cried as she told a friend about seeing Paul's truck at Anita's house. So she was definitely hurt by this. And you can't blame her. I think maybe Monica's the type of person where if her husband's doing that, she kind of had to have someone on the side just to make her feel better. I mean, I kind of see it that way because she was just so dependent on being attractive to men for her self-esteem that it had to be really hard for her to have her husband interested in someone else.
Yeah, I think if you look at it that way, it had to be a tough time for her.
Yeah, absolutely.
Her only worth, at least to her, is to have men being interested in her.
Yeah, and she was sexually abused as a child. She got pregnant at 15. She's very young still. So, very difficult situation for her. So Monica then showed her friend bruises on her elbow and on her side and said that Paul had thrown her into a mirror and broken it. So she described Paul as a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde type of person. On the Saturday before Easter, Paul brought gifts to the house for the girls. Then he went inside to get a drink of water, and Monica followed him around, and she wouldn't let him look in the master bedroom, so he's thinking, there's a guy here, right? He tried to look in the bathroom, and she blocked him, so he ended up punching a hole in the wall out of anger and frustration. After he left, Monica called her friend Vicky and told her that Paul had abused her again and threatened to kill her. Now, that had not been overheard, but to Vicky, Monica did seem like she was genuinely afraid of Paul. So Monica told Vicky about the domestic violence packet that she'd gotten from Dusty Downs, and she told her she was going to file charges against Paul despite his threats. So she said that she was afraid of what he would do once he was notified about the charges, because I'm assuming that won't be good for his job. He'll at least be put on leave and probably fired.
Not going to be good for his job.
And we know that he was very invested in being a police officer. Since he was a kid, basically, he'd wanted to be a police officer. So on Easter Sunday, Monica contacted Dusty Downs again, and she told him that she wanted to proceed with filing charges against Paul for domestic abuse. So Downs explained to her that this would automatically start an administrative investigation of Paul.
Oh, sure.
And he explained that she would need to file the papers in person at the court, so Monica promised to do that the next day. She asked Downs actually to call her the next day, but that would never happen.
Yeah, because on that Monday morning, Paul arrived at Monica's house just as she was backing out of the driveway with the girls in the minivan. Monica saw Paul and pulled back into the driveway. She got out of the van and told him she was taking the girls to their grandmother's house before she went to work. Now, Paul didn't understand this because they had already made plans for him to watch the girls. So he got the girls out of the van, and they all followed Monica back into the house. The girls sat at the table. Paul gave each one of them a bowl of cereal. Monica's older daughter went to take a shower.
Yeah, so at this point, Monica announced that she was filing domestic abuse charges against Paul. And Paul said that he said incredulously, "What are you talking about?" Then she turned toward him and said, "Look at me, I'm bruised all over." She stood in front of him for a moment, then she turned and walked toward the master bedroom. She was wearing a new purple dress which hugged all of her curves. She had pantyhose on and high-heeled pumps. Monica went into the bedroom and closed the door. And outside, Paul pleaded with her to talk to him. And he said he had never hit her, so what was going on? But when Monica wouldn't answer him, Paul pounded on the door. He was losing his temper for sure. He yelled at her to open the door, and then he heard a click, and she called out, "Come here." So this is where everything went to hell. Paul opened the bedroom door, and he would later say that he saw Monica sitting on their waterbed. Then he saw the shotgun in her lap. He knew it was loaded because he always kept his guns loaded in the house, and he had told Monica to keep them that way. Then there was the shotgun blast. Monica's body flew backward and blood spilled onto the floor, and Monica fell onto the floor. She was shot and she was bleeding profusely from her abdomen. Paul tried to lift Monica, but she was covered in blood, and she kept slipping from his grasp. So he tried repeatedly to pick her up, but he couldn't get a grip on her. Then he saw his 15-year-old stepdaughter, Amanda, fresh out of the shower, looking at him with hatred in her eyes. And she yelled, "What did you do to my mom?" So Paul said nothing. He told Amanda to call 911. Her little sister Diane was already making the call, but her big sister took control of the phone, and Paul half-dragged, half-carried Monica through the house. He took her to the garage and tried to put her in the van. He said he was trying to rush her to the hospital, but he couldn't get her in the van and decided that he needed to start doing CPR there. Amanda kept the two little girls away from the garage, but she was watching Paul very suspiciously as he began doing CPR on Monica. So when the first responders arrived, they took over CPR and tried to stop the bleeding, but it was obviously too late. "She died in my arms," Paul repeated over and over again. The Farmington police officers who arrived at the house did not show sympathy towards Paul at all, which kind of surprised him. I mean, these were supposed to be like his brothers.
Right, his comrades.
Yeah, they just had these blank, grim faces, which kind of confused him. But what he didn't understand at the time was that everyone believed he had shot his wife. All they saw was a man dragging his bloody wife to the car, so it was really hard for them to believe that she could have shot herself in her abdomen with the large gun. It was a long gun, which would be very difficult to use on yourself. Then they found the police reports that she had filled out inside of her car. So this was a woman who was planning to file domestic abuse charges against her husband that very day, and now she's dead. So it looks very bad for Paul.
I'd be suspicious.
Yes, everyone was.
Plus the other thing, why would he carry her, drag her through the house, and try to do CPR on her after he couldn't get her into his truck? Why don't you do the CPR right away?
What do you mean after he couldn't get her into the truck? He dragged her from the bedroom towards the truck, trying to get her in the truck and drive her to the hospital.
Right.
But when he couldn't get her in the truck, he started CPR right there in the garage.
Right.
Yeah.
But why didn't he start CPR in the bedroom?
Well, yeah, that's a fair question. A lot of people have asked.
So that's another thing that would make me a little suspicious.
Well, you would think as a policeman, a first responder type, that he would know that.
You do.
But also at the same time, if it's your personal life, you don't always act the same way as you would in your profession. You know, it's a shocking event. But then I also wonder, what did the older daughter say on the 911 call? She was not a fan of Paul. Maybe she said, "My stepdad shot my mom," right from the beginning. Because her first response to him was, "What did you do to my mom?" Right? So after the ambulance took Monica to the hospital, Paul looked at his blood-covered hands and just was in shock, basically. The officers ordered him not to wash because they would want to do gunshot residue testing. And of course, he was the chief suspect. They had been arguing, and he had gone after Monica, and then the gun had gone off. And there were no witnesses to who pulled the trigger but Paul. So it sounds like he's in big trouble.
It does.
Mm-hmm. For 2 hours, New Mexico State police officers questioned Paul while he still had Monica's dried blood on his hands. He was not allowed to go to the hospital to be with his wife, and he wasn't allowed to see his children. They did let him wash his hands finally, and eventually he was allowed to leave the station. He was not under arrest as he underwent blood and urine testing at the hospital, but he knew everyone believed that he had shot Monica. It was really hard to believe that a beautiful young woman with 3 children and a good job would do that to herself, especially with a shotgun. That's very unusual for a woman.
It is.
Women most often kill themselves by taking an overdose of pills. So the whole thing's very shocking. And then Dusty Downs brought up that Monica had visited him just the day before and showed him her bruises. She told him that she was afraid of Paul and afraid of what he would do once she did file domestic abuse charges. So all signs are pointing to Paul as her killer. She had finally gotten the courage to speak up about the abuse, and now she was dead. And that's how they looked at it, is it's not that uncommon. When a woman's ready to leave, that's when she's in the most danger.
Yeah, I can see how they're thinking.
Yeah, but Paul repeated over and over that he did not shoot Monica, even though no one was really believing him. At the hospital, Monica's family was gathered around her, and they were, of course, convinced that Paul had killed her. They couldn't believe that Paul had the nerve to say that she had shot herself with his shotgun. The family would never believe that Monica would end her own life. She would never do that to them or to her children. Plus, they were a pretty strong Catholic family, and Monica knew that killing herself would be a sin that would be punishable by an eternity in hell. So it seemed very unlikely that this was something she would have done.
And after he left the police department, Paul went to his apartment. He talked on the phone with his father and stepmother. He also called his mother. After he hung up with his family, Anita called him. Paul told Anita that Monica had shot herself and that she was dead. Now, Anita already knew that. After Monica died, her niece had come to the bank and said, "I hope you're happy.
Ooh.
That son of a bitch murdered Monica."
Wow, that's a guilt trip.
So Paul thought that Anita had trouble believing his explanation of what had happened. But she's really just stunned by the news.
Of course, and I'm sure she has her own feelings of guilt for ever being involved with him.
Yeah, she just needs some time to let this all sink in.
Yeah, well, she wasn't just going to run right over and be at Paul's side, no.
No.
So attorney Victor Titus met with Paul, and he told Paul not to say anything to anyone. He didn't know that Paul had been having an affair or that Monica had recently found out about it. She just told him that she and Paul were getting divorced. So it bothered Titus that Paul had never told him about the affair because they were friends. So to him it was possible that Paul could have shot Monica, but he also saw what was happening in the marriage as a motive for Monica to perhaps commit suicide because she was very upset about things. Paul didn't see Anita until 3 days after the shooting. He was staying at a friend's house. People had already begun to ostracize Anita because of her affair with Paul, which was now very public knowledge. Paul was put on administrative leave with pay until the investigation was over, and after her autopsy, Monica's body was returned to Farmington, and her funeral was held 4 days later. Now, this is interesting and pretty important that Victor Titus was surprised when he was asked to be a pallbearer, and he wondered why her family would choose him.
I would too. He's not a friend of the family.
Right, they didn't really know him.
He's done some legal work.
Yes, he knew Monica and he knew Paul, but not really Monica's family.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, so Paul was told not to attend the funeral, and Monica's parents refused to allow him to even see or talk to his daughters at all. And worst of all, they separated Diane and Raquel, who'd, always been together. Diane went to stay with Monica's parents, and Raquel went to stay with her Aunt Teresa. So after the funeral, Monica's nephews stood outside of a Walmart store, and they handed out yellow ribbons for people to tie to their vehicle antennas in memory of Monica. Later, a memorial flag was raised at the city's domestic violence shelter in her honor as well. D.A. Allen Whitehead had more than enough motives to feel confident that Paul would be charged in his wife's death. Monica's family, the Sanchez's, were well known in Farmington. Both the governor and the lieutenant governor visited the Sanchez home after the shooting. And still, Whitehead denied any pressure for him to prosecute Paul Dunn.
The medical examiner's report says that the shotgun was 1 to 3 feet away from Monica when the trigger was pulled. Monica had marks on her body from a shot cup.
Yeah, let's explain that a little bit.
When a shotgun shoots, there are metal pellets in this shot cup. So if the gun's 2 feet away, the shot cup will come out and hit the body with 4 petals that break apart. And you can see that on the skin. On Monica's abdomen had marks from the shot cup. So if the gun was 2 feet away from Monica when it was fired, there's no way that she could have done it to herself.
No, she wouldn't have been able to reach the trigger.
So the shot cup marks and the holes in the wall, according to the medical examiner, show that Monica did not shoot herself.
Right. Now, when questioned by the media, D.A. Whitehead brought up the domestic violence packet that had been filled out by Monica just one day before she died. And this included the photos of her bruises that had been taken by Dusty Downs. He said it would be almost impossible for someone to kill themselves with a shotgun. And he pointed to Paul Dunn's physical strength and said that Paul had control problems. So they're kind of setting up Paul as this cliche of the angry cop.
Yep.
Which may have been a little bit true, I'm not sure. But there was no way that Monica could have pulled the trigger with her foot. She'd had pantyhose and heels on. And there's no way that she could reach the trigger of the shotgun if she'd been standing up with the gun.
Right.
So state police sought out a portion of the bedroom wall where the shot pellets ended up and took pieces of the drywall for evidence. Paul took 2 polygraph exams, one for the prosecution team and one for the defense team, which he passed. I don't know, how much strength would you give that?
Not much.
No, I think it's, I'm not sure about those lie detector tests.
Well, as one of our listeners said in a recent case,
yeah,
it's not a lie detector.
Well, not really. It's just
physiologic responses to questions.
Exactly. Right. And it is stressful to take a polygraph.
No kidding.
Yeah. So Victor Titus was not a criminal lawyer, and he referred Paul to an attorney named Gary Mitchell. Paul was arrested, and he couldn't make bail, so he was held in the jail, and he was held in isolation. And that's because he was a policeman. He couldn't just be in the general pop, right?
Right.
But this meant he was in a cell by himself for 23 hours a day, and this would go on for 8.5 months. So this was very difficult.
Can only imagine.
Hard to imagine. So his life was also ruined because he had no job and he had no contact with his children at all. Monica's family was not going to allow that. So the DA took the case to the grand jury, and they asked a lot of good questions about what kind of spread you would expect to see if the gun was shot 1 to 3 feet away from Monica. In the end, though, they decided to charge Paul with first-degree murder, and Gary Mitchell would lead Paul's defense. He looked for the best ballistics and forensic experts to testify for the defense. The prosecution experts had already determined many things that made Paul look guilty. So the defense brought in ballistic expert Nelson Welch and forensics expert Dr. Martin Fackler. Fackler worked with another expert on the wound characteristics, trying to explain Monica's entrance and exit wounds. So the prosecution was saying that there was no way that the shot cup could have hit her the way it did if she had had the gun pressed up against her when she fired. And that would be the only way she would have been able to do it. They said that she had been standing by the bed when Paul had shot her. So the defense needed to show that Monica had shot herself while actually sitting, kind of reclining on the bed.
Yeah, she had to be more supine.
Yeah, like if she was sitting upright and holding the gun and leaning forward with her upper body. That's really the only way she could have pulled that off. So there was a bit of a turning point in the case when Victor Titus asked Monica's family why he was chosen as one of the pallbearers. Remember, I said that was important. Monica was not around to request him, but the family told him that Monica had wanted him to be one of her pallbearers. So Victor told Gary Mitchell about this, and Mitchell had his private investigator talk to Monica's father, Torrey Sanchez. So he was just trying to make chit-chat with Torrey, and he said to Torrey, well, what about that letter that Monica wrote? Really just fishing for information. He had no idea about a letter. Yeah. So he was surprised when Torrey said, yes, there is a letter, I know about it, but it was written to Monica's sister's boyfriend, Ricky, and it's a private matter, and we're keeping it private. But of course, this was big news for the PI.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it turns out Monica had written a letter where she left some of her belongings to people, and she wrote down who she wanted for pallbearers. This letter was written just days after she had found Paul's letter to Anita in his glove compartment. Then soon after she wrote the letter, Monica was dead. The letter talked about how cruel the world is and suggests that she won't be alive much longer, and her father said that this was just a last will and testament. But this letter was written more like, almost like a suicide note. So it could have been a suicide note. It could have been like a foreshadowing of a homicide too. It would match either one of those things, but it really wouldn't match just a last will and testament. No. So the attorneys had a special hearing for the production of the letter, and the judge ordered that the letter be produced. So I'll read you a couple important parts of this letter. It was a 2 or 3 page letter, though. So the letter read, "Help everyone get through this, and remember, I will never be truly gone through my beautiful girls. I'm really sorry about this. I don't have any more strength to go on. I'm tired. When I'm gone, the bruises on me will show." And she wrote out who should be her pallbearers, even made a little joke saying pallbearers, P-A-U-L, like Paul's name, pallbearers. And she wrote out who should give her eulogy. She also wrote who should get her car and specified that Paul should not get her car. So how in the world would she know that she would have bruises when she did die? And if she wasn't planning on hurting herself, why would she say, "I'm really sorry about this. I don't have the strength to go on. I'm tired"? That really doesn't sound like that.
Doesn't.
So her death didn't happen until like a month after the letter was written because it was dated. So how would she know that she'd have the bruises? Either she planned it, or she was saying that Paul beat her all the time, and of course, she would have bruises at any time. So the trial did go forward, though, and Paul anticipated being found guilty because most people were aligned against him. He did have a good attorney and some respected experts on his side, and that's probably what would save him. But still, Paul kept a razor hidden in his cell, because if he were found guilty, he planned to kill himself rather than go to prison. So he'd had a plastic razor to shave, and he'd taken the little razor out of that and hid it, and he had hidden it so that he would be able to use that to take his own life, because he thought if he went to prison, it would just be hell, being a police officer in prison especially.
Yeah. The defense claimed that all the evidence showed the prosecution's theory was completely wrong. The defense tried to map out the trajectory of the pellets, and it didn't work. When the trajectory was followed, it came back to her sitting on the side of the bed. So they were able to debunk the idea that Monica had been standing.
Yes.
The defense expert actually put the shell casing up to the marks on Monica's body, showed that it was the site at the end of the muzzle that made one of those marks.
Yeah, so the shot cup has like 4 petals that will separate.
Right.
But one of those marks was not from a petal. It was from the site. So the shotgun had to be pressed up against her for that to happen.
But upside down.
And it would have been upside down, which makes it even more curious. And then it has, it's like this shot cup, and it has the pellets. And then there's this white Grex material that holds the pellets together when they're shot, so they just don't expand immediately. And this was found inside of her wound and in her exit wound. So if Paul shot her, he would have had to be down on his knees in front of her, holding the gun up against her body, which she would pretty much have to allow him to do. She couldn't have been fighting him, really. So the expert just could not believe all the things that were missed by the medical examiner in the shooting. The situation initially seemed like the stereotypical steroid-taking abusive police officer losing his temper and killing his estranged wife. But Paul actually was not someone who was known to have a temper or had ever beaten his wives or girlfriends. They would testify that he was not abusive to them. Monica's daughter Amanda had seen him push Monica, but no one had seen him beat her or hit her. So there may have been some abuse. There probably was some kind of pushing around. That wouldn't surprise me. But there really was no evidence of that either. So the defense was able to disprove the prosecution's theory and show evidence that Monica herself had pulled the trigger. The jury found Paul Dunn not guilty in less than 1 hour, which was amazing. Jurors would later report that they immediately took a vote, which was unanimously not guilty. Then they'd waited 45 minutes, used the bathroom, combed their hair, so the judge wouldn't be angry and think they hadn't given their verdict enough thought. So they were really convinced by these forensics and ballistics.
So they all believed the defense's experts.
Yes.
More than the prosecution's experts.
Well, and the prosecution's experts really did not have the data. They had not done the testing. The defense had actually set up the headboard and the bed and, used dowels for the trajectories and figured out the blood spatter. They had really done some in-depth investigation and testing on these items. So that's why I say it was Paul's defense team and defense experts who saved him.
Yep, so they had tunnel vision.
Yes, they did, right from the beginning, for sure.
There are still people who believe Paul was responsible for killing Monica.
Well, I can kind of see it. Really, I could really find it kind of hard to believe that she would do that. Does that mean she was trying to set up Paul by writing, all that? Well, I guess not by writing the letter. That wouldn't set him up. That's kind of saved him, actually. But is that why she did it with him there? It could have been she just wanted to hurt him by doing it in front of him.
Yeah.
Or it could have been that she really wanted to set him up and have him go to prison for it. It's hard to say.
It is.
But if it weren't for that evidence, I would say that I would think he did it. Basically, if I was just told the basic facts from the beginning, it's easy to say, yes, the husband probably did this.
Yeah, I think there's still a little part of me that thinks he could have been responsible.
Yeah, me too. Me too. But certainly I agree that they did not prove him to be guilty beyond a reasonable doubt.
No.
So I think it was the correct verdict. Monica was suffering from depression, and I think she just really didn't know how to deal with it. So I think maybe she'd done this to punish him, but it's really amazing to me that she would do that to her children. She would have had to be in a very bad place, I would think, because her children were there in the house. So to have a woman do this with her children in the house in such a violent way is very unusual.
It certainly is.
Yeah.
So Victor Titus filed civil suits to get compensation for Paul Dunn, pointing out that it come to light that a law enforcement official had engaged in misconduct by advising Monica's family to destroy her letter.
Yeah, if that letter hadn't come out.
Yeah. Okay.
I don't know. I mean, they still did have the forensics and the ballistics on their side, but the letter, I think, was very important.
The letter helps tremendously.
Yes, yes.
So the city of Farmington settled for $30,000 and gave Paul his job back under the condition that he would resign immediately.
What does that mean?
Well, it's to make the best out of a bad situation. We'll pay $30,000. We'll give him his job, but he's got to resign. We don't want him here.
Well, I think he no longer wanted to work in law enforcement anyway.
No.
I think he'd really lost faith in the system. He looked at his coworkers as people that would have his back.
Yeah.
Whatever happened to that? But I kind of can see why. Paul's mother even ran a full-page advertisement in the newspaper declaring that Paul had been a political prisoner. She said he was a pawn in a cruel game where his friends had abandoned him, his department had condemned him, and his state's crime laboratory and medical investigator had changed documents to fit their theory. So 6 years after Paul's not guilty verdict, he and Anita moved in together with his daughters Diane and Raquel. So that relationship survived.
And it's still surviving?
As far as I know.
As far as we know. They live in New Mexico?
Yep. And he works as like a construction foreman. He's totally out of law enforcement.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's interesting. I think maybe they did have a real connection. I think he kind of grew up and changed.
Sounds like he might have.
Yeah, it does. But it's just kind of incredible how if you don't have the right people behind you, you can really just be put right in the slammer. Just based on what people think.
Being able to find that letter was a big help.
Yes. Yeah, the letter was a big thing. If you read through the entire letter, which I've read it a couple times, it definitely does read like a suicide letter to me. The only other thing you could see it as is someone who believes they're going to be killed. But she didn't really mention that she was afraid Paul was going to kill her in the letter.
No, we haven't heard any of that sort of stuff.
No. The only time she said that was when she said it to her friends right beforehand, which kind of makes me think she wanted Paul to get into trouble. She was very angry with him, so not too surprising.
No.
Well, thank you, Justin, for recommending this case. We really enjoyed researching and talking about it. It's an interesting one. So before we move on to feedback, which I hope you'll stick around for, I'd just like to remind those of you who are not subscribed to TCB Premium that it is still an option for you. Ads can be a real bummer. You can just be getting into a story and then boom, you get these annoying ads. And if you just become a member, you can get all of our episodes with no ads, plus bonus episodes every month. And if you sign up, that means you're going to get the entire backlog of episodes without ads, which, like we said today, we're on number 600.
Yeah, it might take you a while to get through a few of those.
If you're looking for something to listen to, something to binge, that would be something that you could really get a lot out of. And we do appreciate your support, whether you subscribe or not. We appreciate you listening. And a couple of free ways to support the show are to leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, or we would love to get your feedback or a case suggestion. You can go ahead and send us an email with any kind of feedback you have on a case we've covered or any kind of suggestions of cases you'd like us to cover to truecrimebrewery@tiegrabber.com. Or you can record it yourself in your own voice in a voicemail by clicking on the voicemail link in our show notes or on our website. Again, that website is tiegrabber.com. So thank you for listening. And now feedback.
It's time for listener feedback.
So I was looking through some suggestions on the Facebook group. I have 4 suggestions of cases.
All right. So what have you got?
So Leslie wanted us to cover the murder of Michelle Avila. These girls, Michelle Avila and Karen Severson, have been best friends since they were 8 years old. And once they hit high school, the relationship cooled down a bit. Jealousy might have been a factor, because Avila was thought to be more popular than Severson. And in her junior year, Avila dated a boy named Randy. She broke it off after a month, allegedly because they partied too much.
Okay.
But then Randy began to date Severson, and Avila tried to warn Severson about Randy, but she didn't take very well to that. She thought that Avila just wanted Randy back for her own self. So there's some bad blood brewing. Severson and some other girls got into a physical confrontation with Avila. And then on October 1st, Avila met Severson and another friend, Laura Doyle, to do some shopping. Going to be 3 good buddies going out to do some shopping.
Mm-hmm.
But instead of shopping, the girls went to Angeles National Forest, where Severson and Doyle killed Avila by drowning her. 6 inches of water. They held her down and held her face in the water.
And this was why? She wasn't even with the guy.
Nope. Severson was pissed at her.
Okay. Well, there's some problems there. So they only served what? Well, I guess you can't say only 20 years in prison, but
they're
they've been out.
convicted of second-degree murder.
Yeah. And how is that second degree? It sounds pretty planned out to me.
We're going to, if we do this case, that's some stuff we need to find out, because that was my thought. It sounded like it was planned, so that's first degree.
Mm-hmm.
But they're convicted of second-degree murder. Severson served 20 and a half years, and Doyle 21 years, in that ballpark, a little over 20 years. They've been out for about 15 years now, and apparently are minding themselves.
Okay, so no more murders that we know of.
No more enticing a friend.
Where did that take place?
In the Angeles National Forest, California, outside of L.A.
All right, that sounds like an interesting one. I know we've done them before of teenagers and teenage girls, and how vicious they can be is really shocking.
Yeah, I remember one case in particular.
Yeah, I think where the girl was beaten to death by the other girls.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a brutal one.
That was a while ago we did that.
Yeah. Yeah, I bet you're talking about Shonda Scher. It was in the early 90s, I believe. She was only 12, and these teenage girls just brutally killed her for no apparent reason, really. It's just terrible. I remember seeing an interview with her mother and being heartbroken. Yeah, we covered that many years ago, I guess. We've been doing this for 9 years now, so I bet that case was done over 5 or 6 years ago anyway. But a well-known case, yeah. So we also have a suggestion from Lizzie Liz 9915 for the case of Tara Calico. So on September 1st, 1988, Tara Calico went for a bike ride near her home in Belen, New Mexico, and she hasn't been seen since. In 2013, authorities announced new information in the case, but this has not resulted in any arrests, and now we're 12 years later. So Another New Mexico case.
Yeah, I looked at that because it's New Mexico, and we always want to do home state cases.
If we can, yep.
And it's just the timeline for this. It's been a cold case kind of forever. And then, as you said, 12 years ago, the authorities said there's new information on the case. Tara was 16 years old.
So, sounds like an abduction.
It's an abduction.
Yeah.
With no findings, no body or anything.
Wow.
And I'm thinking that if they had an announcement in 2013 of new info, and there's no result of that, it's not very fruitful.
Well, Tara Lee Calico would be about my age now. It was back in 1988 when she left her home at 9:30 a.m. to go on her daily bike ride along New Mexico State Road 47. So apparently she rode this route almost every morning, and sometimes she went with her mother. However, her mom stopped riding with her after she felt that she'd been stalked by a motorist. So she told her daughter to think about carrying mace, but Tara didn't do that. So on the morning she disappeared, she told her mom to come and get her if she wasn't home by noon, because she had plans to play tennis with her boyfriend. But when she didn't come home, her mom went searching for her along the usual bike route and ended up calling the police because she couldn't find her. So there was this Polaroid photo of an unidentified young woman and a boy, both gagged, and this was actually discovered in a parking lot at a convenience store in Port St. Joe, Florida. And it's funny or strange that this is the same photo that people had identified as possibly being the missing girl Amy Lynn Bradley, which is the very first case we ever did. This was a girl who disappeared off of a cruise ship that she was on with her parents. But this same photo of a girl that's gagged with a little boy bound and gagged behind her it's been thrown around there that it could be Tara, as well as Amy Lynn Bradley, and probably more people as well. The photo was broadcast on A Current Affair back then, and Tara's mom was contacted by friends who had seen the show and thought that the woman in the picture could be her daughter. But like I said, there are other parents that thought it might be their child, and we don't know. Still now, we don't know. In 1998, Tara was declared officially dead, and a judge did rule that she had died by a homicide. But in 2013, there was a 6-person task force that was put together to reinvestigate her disappearance. But still nothing. The FBI even announced a reward, but that really didn't have any effect at all. And in 2021, the New Mexico State Police put out a statement that they had a new lead in the case, and that was the focus of a sealed warrant for an unknown private residence. But no details were provided. And then in 2023, the Valencia County Sheriff's Office announced a breakthrough. Sheriff Denise Vigil and other law enforcement officers were at a press conference, and they said that they believed there was sufficient evidence to submit the investigation to the DA's office to review for potential charges. But nothing since then either, so it's a mystery. Our next suggestion is from Lisa S., and this is about George Trepal. In February of 1991, George Trepal was convicted of murdering his neighbor, Peggy Carr, and attempting to murder her family with thallium. He introduced thallium into bottles of Coca-Cola. Where would you get thallium?
Apparently you can order it from chemical warehouses.
But then there's a record of it.
Yeah, we'll have to check. I was interested in thallium because that's certainly not a drug I'd use or I'd think of using in trying to kill somebody. You know?
No, it sounds like kind of an old drug. I remember some poisonings back in the 1800s I read about with thallium.
Yeah, there's thallium. It's pretty soluble in water. I guess you can ingest it without knowing that you are ingesting it.
So what's behind this? What was the apparent motive?
He just wanted to try it.
Oh, so he had nothing against these people?
Not that I could find. He introduced the thallium into bottles of Coca-Cola, and I guess that Peggy drank more of the Coke than the other family members because she was the only deceased person. The other family members all survived. But, I'm thinking arsenic, polyethylene glycol.
That's a big one.
Cyanide is one we've had. I hadn't heard of thallium being used as a murder weapon.
Oh, I have, yeah. And what about that case with the man who poisoned his woman with nicotine? Have we covered that case, or is that just a Dateline or something?
I think that's just one we've seen on TV.
Oh, I'd like to cover that one because that was pretty fascinating.
Maybe we could do something about novel ways of poisoning people.
Yeah.
Nicotine is what he ended up taking the nicotine out of cigarettes. And
I think so.
distilling it or did something to it.
Something very creative.
To make it concentrated.
Yeah.
And then
it actually injected it in an IV at one point.
Ooh.
Yeah, so that's pretty brutal. Yeah, that is one I'd like to cover. I don't remember the names, but I bet a lot of our listeners know what we're talking about.
I'm sure.
Yeah. Okay. So we also have one more recommendation, and that is from Lana Packman. So this is about Robin Adams, who was murdered back in 1976, but the case went unsolved until 1984. Melvin Garza, a former boyfriend, and his sister Nora were charged with the murder. So Nora cooperated with authorities by showing them where Robin had been buried. Melvin was convicted of first-degree murder and is serving a life sentence. Nora was found guilty of accessory after the fact, and her conviction was set aside in 2011. So what else do we know about this?
Well, so Melvin didn't take kindly to breaking up with Robin Adams, and he killed her. That's the short story.
Okay.
And then he recruited his sister to help conceal the body. And so she did and stayed quiet about it for several years. Eventually, I'm not sure whether her conscience got the better of her or what, but she went to the authorities, told them that she had participated in the killing and helped bury the body. So she got a deal. Instead of being convicted of first-degree murder like her brother, she got accessory after the fact. And after serving some time, her conviction was set aside. So she's not convicted at all.
Interesting.
Yeah, I thought that'd be something to look into a little bit more.
Absolutely, sure.
All right.
Yeah, we've got some updates we'll probably do next time because in a couple weeks, we are going to have the trial starting on Brian Kohlberger in Idaho.
So there's an interesting dateline this past Friday about developments in the case.
Yeah, what did they say that was new? I know it was Keith.
Well, they had new evidential things, like being able to see a car resembling the one Kohlberger drove passing by the house where the people lived.
Many times.
Many times, more than a dozen times. And they have, on the night of the murders, they have a vehicle that looks like his car in the vicinity of the house.
Yeah, and his phone was shut off, which is always suspicious.
Phone was shut off.
Well, I thought what I saw that I remember from that Dateline last weekend was the selfie he took after the murders. It was a few hours after the murders. He looks like he's freshly showered and taking a selfie with a thumbs up, like congratulating himself. Found that super creepy. Boy, if I was one of those roommates that survived, I don't know, just how close you came to being slaughtered is
Yeah, you walked right by one of them.
Yep.
Yeah.
So that'll be an interesting trial, definitely. And then with Lori Vallow being charged in the attempted murder of Brandon Boudreaux, I'm waiting to see if Melanie Boudreaux, or Pulowski as it is now, will testify, either for the prosecution or defense. She's testifying for the prosecution in order to save her own ass, because I feel like they could prosecute her if they wanted to. Don't trust her at all.
They certainly could have.
They could have, I think. So we'll see what happens with that. But in the meantime, thank you all for listening. And I hope you're enjoying this nice springtime. It's getting really nice out down here anyway.
It is nice.
Yeah.
Well, today's supposed to be windy, which means dust, blowing dust.
Yeah, that's
our
one
favorite
thing.
Springtime activity, sweeping the patio.
But it's nice enough to sit outside and have a beer, so
it is.
Let's do that.
We might do that later.
We might do it. Okay. All right. Thank you, everyone, for listening. And we'll see you next time at The Quiet End.
Plenty of room. Come on down.
Bye-bye.
Bye, guys.